Welcome back to The Joy of Vinyl. I'm Rick Coste. Have you seen these headlines? With the recent uptick in sales of vinyl records, people are noticing. And not just people like you and I who absolutely love the format. It's also those people who are, say, hoping to capitalize on our interest. And I don't mean the legitimate record companies out there. There's also a black market out there which, with vinyl sales rising, is getting a shot of adrenaline. The beast is moving again, and it's hoping to feed on your wallet. Terms that used to be commonplace when collecting vinyl records like counterfeit, pirate, and bootleg records, well, oddly enough, those terms are making a comeback. But what are they, and what can we look out for? See this? This is a counterfeit copy of Introducing the Beatles. And it's hard to tell from this picture, but the poor quality of the cover is what gives it away. If you found this in a bargain bin somewhere, you might think the poor quality had to do with the age. And that wouldn't really be a bad assumption. You might even be taken in by a listing on eBay promoting the sale of a decades-old copy that looks worn and used. And it happens. The article at the top of the show that I showed explained how a businessman made himself quite a lot of money by selling counterfeit records before he was caught and called out by an observant buyer, and he was subsequently arrested. Now, whenever there's money to be made, especially with art, it's inevitable that it will attract those hoping to grab a piece of that pie by reproducing it and attempting to sell it as the real thing. You see it all the time with things like paintings. You see it with clothing, you see it with sneakers, and you see it with accessories. And yes, you see it with vinyl records. And it's nothing new. The vinyl black market has been around for years, almost as long as there has been a vinyl market. So let's get into some of the terms and what they mean. Now, when I was young, there were some stores, not the major chains, but small independent record stores that sold unofficial records. Usually these were kept out back in a back room, or they were in a locked case near the back of the store where they weren't so obvious. And these were bootlegs. As an interesting aside, the term bootleg, it actually goes all the way back to the Prohibition era when alcohol was banned. Can you imagine? As with anything, ban something, especially something people want, and smugglers step up to the plate. To meet the demands of the ban on liquor, smugglers would hide flasks in their boots, thus the term bootleg. It would later be applied to unauthorized recording of live concerts or televised appearance of artists. Now, these were pressed to vinyl and subsequently sold. I remember the record store I mentioned used to have a glass case in the back with bootleg Led Zeppelin records. They were all live, and most were pretty poor quality, but it was Zeppelin, and you couldn't get it anywhere else, so who cared if Black Dog sounded muddy and cut off before the end of the song? And then to own that bootleg came with bragging rights. Now, these bootleg records were also expensive. One of the most, I'd say, famous examples of this, and one of the first to really take off, was a bootleg compilation of Bob Dylan recordings and sessions that were called Great White Wonder. Songs from it even made it onto the radio in California, and that increased its visibility, and of course with that came increase in demand for it. Now, if there's one thing that separates bootlegs from counterfeit or pirate records, it's the fact that bootleg records don't claim to be something they're not. They're unofficial releases, and they really don't try to hide that they're unofficial. The quality of the recording may be all over the place, but don't forget, they're unauthorized, and the band or recording artist never received anything from its creation. Next up is pirate records. And these fall between bootlegs and counterfeit records. And they also don't claim to be something that they're not. They aren't unauthorized live performances or compilations. Instead, they're illegal copies of official records released with alternative artwork or alternative labels. And they don't intend to fool the buyer. They just want the buyer's money. A common practice is to present the material as an unofficial picture disc. You'll see this a lot, like this copy of Zeppelin 3. Same tracks, everything's the same, but it's an unofficial pirate disc that's meant to capture the buyer's attention. As with bootlegs, pirate records will often have poor sound quality given the material that they were sourced from, a lot of it digital or poor analog material. And they, of course, don't have access to the original masters or the original stampers. So this leads us to the most evil of practices when it comes to unauthorized records: counterfeit records. Unlike bootlegs or pirate records, counterfeit records are meant to fool you into buying them. The makers will go to pains to mimic the original, from the artwork and the label, and sometimes right down to the catalog number. Often, the quality of the attempt is so bad it's noticeable. Other times, not so much. It can be extremely difficult to tell them apart, especially old records that were produced back in the 70s or 80s when vinyl was king. You might think you've stumbled upon, say, an original pressing of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, when in reality, it's a decades-old copy that you found in a bargain bin and thought it was real. In the case of introducing the Beatles, it's been said that the number of counterfeit copies out there actually outnumber the original. That's crazy and disheartening to the collector. An amusing story, if not for the fact that it was illegal, concerns production of counterfeit copies of the soundtrack to 1978's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The music in the film was basically other artists covering the Beatles songs, I should say, from the original album, most notably the Bee Gees, who starred in the movie. It was really an ill-conceived idea, and the movie, as well as the soundtrack, was a flop. But before it flopped, anticipation for sales was high, so much so that the illegal counterfeiters jumped in. When retailers began to return the unsold records to the distributors, it was reported that there were more returned than were pressed. Oops. So how do you tell a counterfeit from the original? As I mentioned, it can be hard, extremely hard, and a lot of people have a hard time even telling them apart. As with introducing the Beatles, look for things like poor print quality in both the cover and the label. If you see a typo, well, that would of course be a huge red flag. Counterfeit records are sometimes of poorer quality, even right down to the vinyl itself. The vinyl will sometimes be thinner and lighter than the original. You may also see blemishes like bumps or streaks on the vinyl surface. Other things to look for are labels that are ripped near the spindle hole. And also look at the covers. Are the covers thin, and do the photos look like they're pixelated or blurry? And also the matrix numbers in the dead wax between the grooves and the label may be incorrect or hand-etched when the originals were stamped. And that's not to say there aren't near perfect copies out there. There most certainly are. Today, a person that's skilled with Photoshop can fake an image of a UFO over a lake that looks real, and they can definitely create labels and covers that appear perfect. Some could fool the most observant and most skilled collector. Other questionable practices are sellers who seem to have limitless numbers of original rare pressings. Sometimes they're sealed. The shrink wrap will have multiple stickers, often with price tags from Kmart or other stores from the past, and they're unscrupulous with the goal of fooling you into thinking you were buying something original only to find out that it was fake. Or you may never find out. Now, I don't say any of this to scare you or make you question what you're purchasing. Consider it just a simple PSA. Being educated or being aware that they're out there really is more than half the battle. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, as always, on this subject. Comment below, and if you're not subscribed, well, just click the button over here. And as always, thank you for watching. And until next time, please take care of yourself and enjoy your records.